The autumn sun rose slowly over the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the morning dew. Main Street was quiet at this hour, with only a few pickup trucks rolling past the old brick buildings that had stood there for generations. The air carried that particular crispness of October mornings, when summer's warmth finally surrenders to the approaching winter. Emily Carter pushed through the back door of Rosie's Diner, her breath forming small clouds in the cool air. At 24 years old, she had the kind of face that showed every emotion, honest brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, and an expression that made strangers feel comfortable enough to share their troubles. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the same uniform she'd worn for 3 years, a pale blue dress with roses embroidered on the pocket, covered by a white apron that had seen better days. "Morning, Em," called Janet from inside, her voice carrying through the kitchen's serving window. Janet was 53, had worked at Rosie's for 20 years, and knew everything about everyone in Millbrook. "Coffee's fresh," Emily smiled as she tied her apron. "You're a lifesaver, Jan. I overslept again. That's the 3rd time this week, honey. You staying up late studying again?" Emily poured herself a cup of coffee, the steam rising to warm her face. "Just trying to get through that online business course. If I can finish it, maybe I can manage something better than this." She gestured around the diner, immediately feeling guilty. "Not that this is bad. I know what you mean," Janet interrupted kindly, flipping pancakes on the griddle. "You've got dreams bigger than Millbrook. Nothing wrong with that. Your mama would be proud you're trying to better yourself." The mention of her mother brought a familiar ache to Emily's chest. 3 years gone, and the grief still caught her by surprise sometimes. The diner had been her mother's favorite place where they'd shared countless breakfasts before Emily's world had fallen apart. Now she worked here, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment above the hardware store, trying to save enough to maybe, someday, start over somewhere else. 7:15 a.m. Morning rush begins. The diner filled quickly with the breakfast crowd. Tom Wilson, who owned the gas station down the street, took his usual spot at the counter. The Morrison family, parents and 3 kids, squeezed into their favorite booth. Old Mr. Hendricks sat by the window with his newspaper, ordering the same thing he'd ordered every morning for 40 years. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and black coffee. Emily moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine despite her exhaustion. She had a gift for remembering orders, for knowing that Mrs. Chen liked extra napkins for her grandchildren, that Deputy Brooks always needed his coffee topped off 3 times, that young Amy Foster was saving up for college and appreciated when Emily accidentally gave her extra hash browns. "Emily, sweetheart," called Mrs. Chen from booth 3. "Could we get some more orange juice?" "Coming right up, Mrs. Chen." The morning passed in its familiar rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, the comfortable murmur of conversation, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee. This was Millbrook, predictable, safe, unchanging. Emily had grown up here, and while part of her longed for something more, another part of her loved the simplicity of knowing everyone, of being known. 10:30 a.m., the discovery. By mid-morning, the rush had slowed to a trickle. Janet went on her break, and Emily took the opportunity to handle the trash, one of the less glamorous parts of the job. She grabbed 3 heavy bags from the kitchen and pushed through the back door into the alley behind the diner. The alley wasn't much to look at. Cracked asphalt, a dumpster that had seen better days, the brick walls of the diner on one side, and the old pharmacy on the other. A few weeds pushed through the pavement cracks, stubborn and determined. The October breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves from the maple trees that lined Main Street. Emily hoisted the first bag into the dumpster, then the second. As she lifted the third, she heard something, a small sound, like a whimper or a stifled cough. She froze, listening. There it was again. "Hello?" Emily called out, her voice uncertain. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then from behind the dumpster came the unmistakable sound of rapid breathing, someone trying very hard to be quiet and failing. Emily's heart quickened. She set down the trash bag carefully and moved around the dumpster, not sure what to expect. A stray dog, maybe? A raccoon? But the breathing sounded human, and that worried her more. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly, the way you'd speak to a frightened animal. "Are you okay back there?" She peered around the dumpster's edge, and her breath caught. A boy sat huddled against the brick wall, his knees pulled up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His clothes, dark pants and what had once been a white button-down shirt, were filthy, covered in dirt and what looked like grass stains. His face was smudged with grime, his dark hair disheveled and sticking up in odd angles. But it was his eyes that caught Emily's attention. Large, dark, and filled with such fear that it made her chest ache. "Oh, honey," Emily breathed, instinctively dropping to a crouch a few feet away, making herself less threatening. "What are you doing out here?" The boy said nothing, just stared at her with those huge, terrified eyes. Emily's mind raced. A child, alone, dirty, hiding behind a dumpster. Nothing about this was right. Her first instinct was to call someone, the authorities, anyone, but something in the boy's expression stopped her. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt if she made the wrong move. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The boy's eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward the diner's back door. That tiny movement told Emily everything she needed to know. "Wait here," she said, standing slowly. "Just wait here, okay? I'm going to get you something to eat." She expected him to run, but he didn't move. As Emily backed toward the door, keeping him in sight, she noticed details that didn't quite fit. Despite the dirt, his clothes looked expensive, well made. There was a watch on his wrist. She couldn't see it clearly, but it caught the light in a way that cheap watches didn't. And his shoes, though scuffed and dirty, were quality leather. 10:35 a.m., an act of compassion. Emily slipped back into the kitchen, her mind spinning. Janet was still on break, probably outside the front having her cigarette. The lunch cook, Ray, wouldn't arrive for another hour. She was alone, and she had to make a decision. She moved quickly, grabbing a clean plate, 2 pancakes, a generous helping of scrambled eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and some fresh fruit from the cooler. She added a large glass of milk and, after a moment's hesitation, wrapped up some cookies that Mrs. Patterson had brought in that morning. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. This wasn't protocol. She should call someone. Deputy Brooks had been in earlier. She could call the sheriff's department. They'd know what to do. But something held her back. The terror in that child's eyes. The way he'd looked at her as if expecting the worst. Emily grabbed a clean dish towel, dampened it with warm water, and loaded everything onto a tray. She glanced around the kitchen one more time, then pushed back out into the alley. The boy was still there, still pressed against the wall, but his eyes tracked her movement with laser focus. "I brought you breakfast," Emily said, kneeling down about 5 feet from him and setting the tray on the ground. "You don't have to tell me anything. You don't have to talk at all. But you need to eat, okay?" She slid the tray toward him slowly, then stood and backed away several steps, giving him space. For a long moment, the boy didn't move. His eyes went from her face to the food and back again, as if trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. Emily could see the internal war playing out across his young face. Suspicion, fighting against desperate hunger. Hunger won. The boy lunged forward, grabbing the plate with both hands. He ate like someone who hadn't had a meal in days, stuffing the eggs into his mouth with his fingers, barely chewing before swallowing. Emily winced, worried he'd make himself sick, but she didn't try to stop him. She'd seen enough in her years at the diner to recognize true hunger when she saw it. "Slow down, sweetheart," she said gently. "There's plenty. No one's going to take it from you." The boy paused, looking up at her with egg on his chin, and something in his expression shifted slightly. The fear still there, but joined now by something else. Confusion, maybe, as if kindness without expectation was a foreign concept. He ate more slowly after that, and Emily watched, her heart breaking a little more with each bite. Who was this child? Where had he come from? Where were his parents? When he'd finished the food, the boy reached for the milk with trembling hands and drank it all in long gulps. Finally, he set down the empty glass and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a clean streak through the dirt on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Emily smiled. "You're welcome. Here." She picked up the damp towel and held it out. "You can clean up a bit if you want." The boy took the towel hesitantly and began wiping his face and hands. As the dirt came away, Emily could see he had good features, a strong nose, defined cheekbones, olive-toned skin that suggested Mediterranean heritage. Italian, maybe, or Greek. "What's your name?" Emily asked softly. The boy's hands stopped moving. His eyes met hers and she saw the calculation there. This child, whoever he was smart enough to know that names meant something, that information could be dangerous. "Mikey," he said finally. "Mikey," Emily repeated, nodding. "That's a good name." I'm Emily. 11. M. Decisions and consequences. Emily. Janet's voice rang out from inside the diner. Where'd you disappear to? Emily's eyes widened. She looked at Mikey, who had gone rigid with fear again, ready to run. Stay here, she told him quickly. I'll be right back, I promise. She didn't wait for his response, just grabbed the tray and rushed back inside. Janet was in the kitchen starting prep work for lunch. Sorry, Jan. The trash bag split and I had to clean up the mess. Janet gave her a skeptical look. You've got leaves in your hair, hun. Emily's hand flew to her head, brushing away the evidence of her time crouching in the alley. Yeah, it was quite a mess. Janet didn't push it, but her eyes were knowing. Well, we've got a party of 6 coming in at 11:30, so shake a leg. Emily nodded and quickly washed the dishes, her mind racing. She couldn't leave Mikey out there. The temperature was supposed to drop this afternoon and rain was forecast for evening, but she also couldn't bring him inside. Janet would have questions, customers would see him, and then what? The authorities would be called, and something told Emily that might be the worst possible outcome. She'd worked at Rosie's long enough to know the schedule by heart. Ray would arrive at noon to start lunch prep. Janet would leave at 2 for her daughter's dentist appointment. If Emily could just keep Mikey hidden until then, she'd have a window to figure out what to do next. During her next break, she snuck back outside with a fleece blanket from her car and a bottle of water. Mikey was still there, sitting exactly where she'd left him, as if he'd been frozen in place by her command to stay. Here, Emily said, wrapping the blanket around his thin shoulders. It's getting cold. Why are you helping me? Mikey asked suddenly. His voice was stronger now, fed and slightly less afraid. Emily sat down on the ground beside him, keeping a respectful distance. Because you need help. Because you're just a kid and you're scared and... She trailed off, thinking of her own childhood, of times when she'd needed help and someone had been there. Because that's what people should do for each other. Mikey studied her face intently, as if memorizing every feature. Most people don't. The sadness in those 4 words hit Emily like a physical blow. What kind of life had this child lived to believe that? Well, I'm not most people, she said firmly. And right now you're safe. Okay? Mikey nodded slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. Mikey, I need to ask you something and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Emily took a breath. Is someone looking for you? Someone who would be worried that you're missing. The boy's face clouded over with an emotion Emily couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also something like guilt or regret. Maybe, he whispered. Do you want to go home? I don't know. His voice cracked slightly. It's complicated. Emily understood complicated. Her whole life had been complicated since her mother passed. The medical bills, the creditors, the daily struggle to keep her head above water. But this was a different kind of complicated, she sensed. This was the kind that a child shouldn't have to deal with. Okay, she said gently. You don't have to decide right now. But Mikey, I work until 6 tonight. When I get off, I'm going to take you somewhere safe and warm, and we're going to figure this out together. Can you stay hidden here until then? Yes, Mikey said immediately. I'm good at hiding. Another statement that broke Emily's heart. There's a storage room, Emily said, thinking quickly. Through that door, she pointed to a side entrance she'd almost forgotten about, one that led to a small room where Rosie kept extra supplies. No one uses it much. You could wait in there. There's even an old cot from when Rosie used to work overnight. Would that be better than out here? Mikey's eyes lit up at the prospect of being inside, truly sheltered. Could I? Come on. Emily stood and offered her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Mikey took it. His hand was small and cold in hers, and Emily felt a surge of protective instinct so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This child, this scared, hungry child who'd somehow ended up behind her diner, she was going to make sure he was okay, whatever it took. 11:45 a.m. Hidden away. The storage room was small but adequate. Boxes of paper napkins lined one wall, industrial-sized containers of cooking oil another. In the corner sat the old cot, exactly as Emily remembered it, with a thin mattress that had seen better days but was clean enough. It's not much, Emily said, pulling the cord on the single overhead bulb. Dim light filled the space. But no one comes in here except maybe once a week to grab supplies. You'll be safe. Mikey looked around the small room as if it were a 5-star hotel. It's perfect, he said quietly. Emily found an old blanket on a shelf, shook it out, and laid it over the cot. You should rest. You look exhausted. I am, Mikey admitted, climbing onto the cot and curling up on his side. Even with food in his belly and a blanket around him, he looked impossibly small and vulnerable. "I'll come check on you when I can," Emily promised. "And I'll bring you lunch later, okay?" "Emily?" Mikey's voice was drowsy now, sleep already pulling at him. "You're really nice." "So are you, kiddo," Emily said softly. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Mikey, if you need anything, if you get scared, there's a bucket here you can knock over. I'll hear it from the kitchen. Don't be afraid to make noise if you need me." But Mikey was already asleep, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of exhausted childhood. Emily stood there for a moment, watching him, and wondered what on earth she'd just gotten herself into. She closed the door quietly and returned to work, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. 1:30 p.m., the world beyond. Inside Rosie's diner, life continued its normal rhythm. The lunch rush came and went. Emily served sandwiches and soup, refilled coffee cups, and made small talk with customers who had no idea that just beyond the kitchen wall, a mysterious child slept in their storage room. But beyond Millbrook, in the wider world that Emily knew nothing about, other forces were already in motion. In a city 3 hours away, phones were ringing, people were mobilizing. Security footage from a gas station 40 miles from Millbrook was being analyzed frame by frame. A child had gone missing, not just any child, but one whose absence sent shockwaves through a network of power and influence that most people didn't even know existed. And as Emily wiped down tables and counted her tips, as Mikey slept peacefully in his hidden refuge, as the autumn sun tracked across the Pennsylvania sky, the distance between these two worlds, the quiet small-town life and the dangerous other realm, was shrinking with every passing hour. Emily checked on Mikey during her 2 o'clock break, bringing him a sandwich and more water. He ate more slowly this time, with better manners, and she noticed again the contradiction: the expensive watch, the quality of his clothes beneath the dirt, the way he held himself with a certain unconscious dignity even in his desperate circumstances. "Mikey," she said as he ate, "that's a really nice watch." His hand instinctively covered it. Protective. It was a gift. From someone special? He hesitated. "Yeah, someone special." Emily didn't push. She was beginning to understand that this child carried secrets, heavy ones, and she'd learn them when he was ready to share, if he ever was. 5:30 p.m., closing in. As Emily's shift neared its end, she began to feel the weight of what she'd done, what she was doing. She'd harbored a runaway child, if that's what he was. She hadn't reported him to the authorities. She'd made decisions that could have consequences she couldn't predict. But when she checked on Mikey one last time before clocking out, when she saw him sitting on the cot with his blanket wrapped around him, looking at her with eyes that held a glimmer of hope they hadn't held that morning, she knew she couldn't have done anything differently. "Ready to go?" she asked. Mikey nodded, standing up and carefully folding the blanket. "Where are we going?" "My apartment," Emily said. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. We can figure out the rest from there." As they prepared to leave through the back entrance, Emily had no way of knowing that she was already on someone's radar. She didn't know about the black SUVs that had been moving through nearby towns all day. She didn't know about the questions being asked, the security footage being reviewed, the net that was slowly tightening around Millbrook. She didn't know that her simple act of kindness, feeding a hungry child, had already changed the trajectory of her life in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew was that this child needed help, and she was going to provide it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight she'd get Mikey cleaned up, fed properly, and rested. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to do the right thing without putting him in danger. Emily Carter had no way of knowing that tomorrow, everything would change. The mansion sat on 15 acres of pristine land, surrounded by tall iron gates and walls that spoke of both wealth and paranoia. The estate was located in an affluent suburb outside Pittsburgh, where old money and new power coexisted in an uneasy balance. The house itself was a masterpiece of Italian architecture, cream-colored stone, arched windows, and manicured gardens that looked like they belonged in Tuscany rather than Pennsylvania. Inside, 8-year-old Michael Romano Jr. sat at the long dining table in a room that could seat 20 people. The table was mahogany, probably worth more than most people's cars. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Paintings in gilded frames decorated the walls. Real art, the kind that appeared in museums. But Michael Jr. ate his breakfast alone. His father's place at the head of the table sat empty, the chair pushed in, No plate set. This was normal. His father was always busy, always in meetings, always dealing with business matters that Michael Jr. wasn't supposed to ask about. Maria, the housekeeper who'd been with the family for 15 years, set down a plate of eggs and toast. "Eat up, Piccolo," she said gently, using the Italian term of endearment. "You have tutoring in an hour." "Where's Papa?" Michael Jr. asked, though he already knew the answer. "Working, Caro. Always working." Maria's face softened with sympathy. She'd watched this boy grow up essentially alone in this big house, surrounded by security and staff, but starving for something no amount of money could buy: his father's attention. Michael Jr. pushed the eggs around his plate. Through the tall windows, he could see the gardens, the fountain, the high walls that kept the world out, or kept him in. He wasn't sure which anymore. "Maria, do normal kids have bodyguards?" The housekeeper paused in her work, her expression sad. "No, Tesoro. Most children don't." "Then why do I?" It was the question he'd asked 100 times, and Maria gave the answer she always gave. "Your papa wants you safe. That's all." But Michael Jr. was 8 years old, and smart beyond his years. He'd begun to understand that his life wasn't normal, that the armed men who followed him everywhere, the high walls, the security cameras, the way people acted nervous around his father, it all meant something. Something that made his stomach feel tight and strange. He'd overheard conversations he wasn't supposed to hear, words like organization and territory and respect. He'd seen the way people looked at his father, with fear mixed with deference. He'd noticed that they never had normal friends over, that his father never went to parent-teacher conferences, that their life existed in this bubble of wealth and isolation. "Can I go outside today?" he asked. "Just in the garden?" "After tutoring, perhaps, but you know you must stay where Antonio can see you." Antonio was his primary security guard, a mountain of a man who never smiled and always wore a suit despite the weather. Michael Jr. was tired of Antonio, tired of being watched, tired of living in a golden cage. 7:30 a.m., the Romano estate. One day ago, Vincenzo Romano stood in his study, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled of expensive cigars and older money. At 39 years old, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just beginning to show threads of silver at the temples. He had the kind of face that could be called handsome, but was more accurately described as commanding. Sharp features, intense dark eyes, and a jaw that suggested he wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. He wore a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Emily Carter made in 3 months. Everything about him spoke of power, control, and danger carefully contained beneath a veneer of respectability. "The Pittsburgh arrangement needs to be finalized by Friday," he said into his phone, his voice low and steady. "I don't care what obstacles there are, make it happen." Marco Castellano, his second-in-command and closest confidant, sat in one of the leather chairs across from Vincenzo's desk. At 42, Marco had been with the Romano family for 20 years, working his way up from driver to the position he now held. Vincenzo's right hand, his problem solver, his voice of reason when reason was required. Vincenzo ended the call and looked at Marco. "The New York families are getting restless about the expansion." "They always get restless," Marco replied calmly. "They'll fall in line. They always do." "And the shipment arriving next week?" "On schedule. The usual route, the usual contacts. No complications anticipated." They discussed business for another 30 minutes. Legitimate enterprises mixed with less legitimate ones, the kind of empire that Vincenzo's father had built and Vincenzo had inherited at 25 when his father passed. An empire that required constant attention, constant vigilance, constant sacrifice, including, Vincenzo thought with a familiar pang of guilt, the sacrifice of time with his son. "How's Michael?" Marco asked, as if reading his mind. Vincenzo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Growing. Smart. Too smart, maybe. He's asking questions? Maria says he's asking about security, about why his life is different from other children's." Marco leaned forward. "He's 8, Vin. Eventually you'll need to tell him something." "Tell him what?" Vincenzo's voice carried an edge of frustration. "That his father runs an organization that most people fear? That the reason he can't have a normal childhood is because there are people who would use him to get to me? That his mother—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Michael Jr.'s mother, Isabella, had passed away when the boy was only 3. Complications during what should have been a routine medical procedure, a tragedy that had nearly destroyed Vincenzo. She'd been the light in his dark world, the one person who'd seen past the reputation and the power to the man beneath. Her loss had left a hole in his life that nothing could fill, and his way of coping had been to throw himself deeper into the business, into the empire building, into anything that would distract him from the grief. The unintended consequence was that Michael Jr. had lost not just his mother, but in many ways, his father, too. "The boy needs you," Marco said quietly. "More than he needs security guards or tutors or that big house." "I know," Vincenzo said, "and the admission cost him something. This weekend, I'll clear my schedule. We'll do something together, just the two of us." But Vincenzo Romano would never get the chance to make good on that promise. 2:15 p.m., one day ago, the escape. Michael Jr. sat in the library during his afternoon study period, ostensibly working on mathematics problems. His tutor, Mr. Ray Peterson, had stepped out to take a phone call, and Antonio, his bodyguard, stood outside the library door rather than inside, a small concession to making the boy feel less watched. The library was one of Michael Jr.'s favorite rooms. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held thousands of volumes, many of them first editions his grandfather had collected. A tall window looked out over the east garden, and it was this window that had captured Michael Jr.'s attention for weeks now. It was old, original to the house, and unlike the other windows throughout the mansion, it didn't have the new security sensors installed. Michael Jr. had noticed this detail 3 months ago, and had been thinking about it ever since. The window opened. He'd tested it during a previous study session, and below it was a rose trellis that looked sturdy enough to climb down. Today, looking at that window, something inside Michael Jr. snapped. He was tired of the walls, tired of the guards, tired of eating meals alone, tired of his father's empty promises of time together that never materialized. He wanted to see what existed beyond the gates, wanted to walk down a street without Antonio hovering 2 steps behind, wanted to be just a normal kid, even if only for a little while. Before he could talk himself out of it, he crossed to the window and opened it. The autumn air rushed in, cool and smelling of freedom. He looked back at the library door, still closed, Mr. Peterson's voice audible from down the hall. Michael Jr. climbed onto the window seat, then carefully maneuvered himself out onto the trellis. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The ground looked much farther away than he'd thought, but he'd already committed. Hand over hand, foot by foot, he descended the trellis, thorns from the roses catching on his good shirt, but not stopping him. When his feet hit solid ground, he felt a rush of exhilaration unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He'd done it. He was outside, unguarded, alone. The estate was large, but Michael Jr. knew every inch of it from his supervised outdoor time. He knew where the cameras were positioned, where the security team patrolled, where the weak points in their coverage existed. He'd never planned to use this knowledge, but apparently some part of him had been preparing for this moment anyway. He ran through the garden, keeping low, his expensive shoes getting muddy in the flower beds. He reached the back wall, where old oak trees grew close enough to provide cover. One of them, his favorite for climbing during supervised play, had a branch that extended over the wall. Michael Jr. climbed. He'd always been good at climbing, one of the few physical activities he excelled at. Up into the oak tree along the branch that scraped against the stone wall, and then, his heart in his throat, he jumped. He landed hard on the other side, on grass that was public property, not part of the Romano estate. For the first time in his life, he was outside the walls without permission, without supervision, without anyone knowing where he was. Michael Jr. ran. He didn't have a plan beyond this moment. He just knew he needed to run, needed to put distance between himself and the life he was fleeing, even if he didn't fully understand why he needed to flee it. Present day, 10:45 a.m., the Romano estate. Vincenzo sat in his study, the phone pressed to his ear, his other hand clenched into a fist on the desk. His face had gone pale beneath his olive complexion, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that made experienced men nervous. "What do you mean he's gone?" Antonio stood before the desk, a man who'd faced down dangerous situations without flinching, now looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Romano, we've searched the entire property. He's not here. We believe he left sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon." "Yesterday?" Vincenzo's voice could have cut glass. "My son has been missing for over 20 hours, and I'm only hearing about this now. Sir, we hoped we could find him before you had to admit you'd lost track of an 8-year-old child." Vincenzo stood abruptly, his chair rolling back. "An 8-year-old child who was your sole responsibility? Marco entered the study quickly, reading the tension in the room. Vin, we need to approach this strategically. Strategically? Vincenzo turned on him and Marco saw something in his friend's eyes he'd rarely seen. Fear. Not the calculated wariness that came with their line of work, but genuine, primal fear. My son is missing, Marco. My son. I know, and we're going to find him. But we need to think clearly. Marco's voice was calm, anchoring. Have you checked with the authorities? I called our contact at the police department the moment I was informed, Antonio said. They've issued an alert, but discreetly. No media involvement yet. Good. Marco nodded. We can't afford a media circus. Too many questions about why a child from this address went missing. Vincenzo paced behind his desk, his mind racing. He can't have gone far on foot. A child his age without resources. Sir? Antonio interrupted hesitantly. His room was searched. Some clothes are missing and... He paused. The emergency cash you kept in his nightstand. $500. It's gone. Vincenzo stopped pacing. Michael Jr. had known about that money. Vincenzo had shown it to him months ago, told him it was there in case of emergency, though Vincenzo had never imagined the emergency would be his son running away from him. He planned this, Vincenzo said quietly. This wasn't impulsive. He took supplies, money. He had a destination in mind. Or he's just a smart kid who grabbed what he thought he'd need. Marco countered. Vin, we need to mobilize everyone. Every contact, every resource. Someone has seen him. Vincenzo nodded, his mind shifting into the mode that had made him successful in his business. Strategic, focused, relentless. Contact all our people in the surrounding counties. I want eyes everywhere. Gas stations, bus stations, train stations, diners, hotels. Circulate his photo but keep it quiet. Tell them it's a family matter, that discretion is appreciated. Already being done, Marco said. I've got 20 men on this already. More coming in from Philadelphia and New York. What about security footage? Traffic cameras. We're pulling everything we can access. It takes time, but we'll find something. Vincenzo sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 39 years. Why would he run? What did I... He stopped, but the question hung in the air. What did I do wrong? Maria appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. Mr. Romano, I'm so sorry. If I had known... This isn't your fault, Maria. Vincenzo's voice gentled for her in a way it hadn't for Antonio. Did Michael seem upset? Was he angry about something? Not angry, Maria said carefully. Just sad, lonely. He asked me yesterday morning if normal children had bodyguards. I think he's been feeling the weight of being different. The words hit Vincenzo like a physical blow. His son had run away because he was lonely, because he wanted to be normal, because Vincenzo had been so consumed with building and maintaining his empire that he'd failed to see what his son actually needed. Find him, Vincenzo said, and the words were both a command and a plea. Whatever it takes, find my son. 12:30 p.m., present day, gas station, 40 miles from Millbrook. Tony Salvatore stood in front of the gas station, holding up a photograph of Michael Romano Jr. to the clerk behind the counter. Tony was one of Marco's best men, observant, thorough, and patient, qualities that made him good at this kind of work. Seen this kid? Tony asked. Would have been yesterday afternoon or evening. The clerk, a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, glanced at the photo without much interest. Maybe. We get a lot of people through here. This one's important. Tony pulled out a $100 bill and set it on the counter. Worth remembering if you saw him. The teenager's attention sharpened considerably. He picked up the photo, studied it more carefully. Yeah, actually. Yeah, I did see him. Yesterday, maybe around 4 o'clock. He came in, bought some water and chips, paid cash. Did he say anything where he was going? Nah, he was quiet, seemed, nervous. Kept looking over his shoulder. The clerk paused. Is he in trouble or something? Just a family matter. We're trying to bring him home safely. Tony handed over the $100. Did you see which direction he went when he left? That way, I think. The clerk pointed east, toward the highway. Tony thanked him and immediately called Marco. We've got confirmation. Kid was spotted at the Route 30 gas station yesterday afternoon heading east. He's on foot, buying supplies with cash, smart enough to stay away from main roads. Good work. Marco's voice came through the phone. Keep following that trajectory. I'm sending more people to fan out along Route 30. If he's on foot, he can't have made it more than 20, maybe 25 miles by now. After Tony hung up, He stood in the gas station parking lot, looking east. 25 miles. That put potential sightings in a radius that included several small towns, dozens of businesses, hundreds of places a child could hide or find help. But they'd find him. The Romano organization was nothing if not thorough. 2:45 p.m. Present day. Vincenzo's car. Vincenzo sat in the back of his black Mercedes SUV, Marco beside him, as they drove through the small towns along Route 30. They'd been on the road for 2 hours, stopping at every business, every diner, every place where a child on foot might stop. He's resourceful, Marco said, reviewing reports on his tablet, staying off cameras, avoiding main streets. He's his father's son. Vincenzo didn't respond. He stared out the window at the passing landscape, the small-town America his son had fled into, so different from the insulated world of the Romano estate. Strip malls and gas stations, mom-and-pop restaurants and family-owned shops, places where everyone knew everyone, where a stranger, especially a child alone, would be noticed. "We'll find him, Vin," Marco said quietly. "Before nightfall, I promise you that." "And when we do?" Vincenzo asked, still not looking at his friend. "When we bring him back to that house, that life he ran away from, what then? Do we post more guards? Build the walls higher? Make his cage even more secure? You give him what he needs," Marco said. "Time, attention, a father, not just a provider." Vincenzo finally turned to look at him. "You know what I am, what I do. You know why that house needs those walls, why my son needs protection. I can't change that." "No," Marco agreed. "But you can change how much of yourself you give to the business versus how much you give to him. The empire will survive if you delegate more. Your relationship with your son might not survive if you don't." It was a truth Vincenzo had been avoiding for years, and hearing it spoken aloud made it impossible to ignore any longer. His phone buzzed. A text from Tony. "Possible sighting. Millbrook Diner. Following up." "Millbrook," Vincenzo said, leaning forward to tell the driver. "Head to Millbrook. 4:15 p.m. Present day. Emily's apartment." Emily Carter stood in her small studio apartment, staring at her phone. She'd called in sick to work for the first time in over 2 years, and Janet had sounded genuinely concerned, which made Emily feel guilty for lying. But she couldn't go in, not with Mikey, who was currently sitting at her tiny kitchen table, clean for the first time since she'd found him. She'd drawn him a bath, given him some clothes that had belonged to her younger cousin, left behind on a visit months ago, and made him a proper meal. Without the dirt, he looked even younger, more vulnerable, and those dark eyes seemed to see right through her. "I need to ask you some questions," Emily said, sitting down across from him. "And I need honest answers, Mikey, because I want to help you, but I can't do that if I don't understand what's going on." Mikey nodded slowly, his expression guarded. "Why did you run away?" I wanted to be normal." His voice was small. "Just for a little while." "Normal how?" "No guards. No one watching me all the time. No walls." He looked down at his hands. "I wanted to see what it's like to be a regular kid." Emily's heart ached. "Mikey, who are your parents? Where do you live?" "My mom died when I was little," he said quietly. "And my dad? He's busy. He's always busy. But he loves you?" "I think so. Maybe. I don't know." Mikey's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He doesn't really have time for me." Emily reached across the table and gently took his hand. "Mikey, whatever's going on with your family, however complicated it is, your dad must be worried sick. You've been gone almost a whole day. He probably hasn't even noticed," Mikey said bitterly. "He's probably in some meeting, making some deal, too busy to—" He stopped abruptly as if he'd said too much. Emily studied his face. The expensive watch, which she'd noticed was a Rolex, not a knockoff, the quality of his original clothes, the way he spoke, the guard he'd mentioned, the walls. Pieces were clicking together, forming a picture she didn't like. "Mikey, is he someone important?" The boy's silence was answer enough. Emily stood, walked to the window, looked out at the quiet street below. Her simple life, her small-town existence, her modest dreams of someday managing a better restaurant, all of it suddenly felt very fragile. "I think," she said slowly, "we need to figure out how to get you home safely. I don't want to go back. I know, sweetie, but staying with me isn't a real solution. Eventually, someone's going to come looking and—" She stopped. Through the window, she'd seen something that made her blood run cold. A black SUV moving slowly down her street, clearly searching for something, or someone. "Mikey," she said, her voice urgent. "Come away from the window. Now." Emily woke to the sound of movement in her small kitchen. For a brief, disoriented moment, she forgot about yesterday, forgot about the boy she'd brought home. Then reality crashed back, and she sat up quickly on the narrow couch where she'd spent an uncomfortable night, having given Mikey her bed. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, a studio with a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and a sleeping area that could charitably be called cozy. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating dust motes in the air and the worn carpet that had seen better decades. Mikey stood at the counter, still wearing the oversized t-shirt and sweatpants Emily had given him. He'd drawn something on a piece of paper. She could see colorful markers spread across the counter, borrowed from the small craft supplies she kept for the occasional greeting card. "Good morning," Emily said softly, not wanting to startle him. Mikey turned, and Emily was struck by how different he looked after a night of rest, a proper bath, and a full stomach. The haunted look hadn't completely left his eyes, but there was more light there now, more of what an 8-year-old should have. "I made you something," he said, holding up the paper shyly. Emily crossed the small space and took the drawing. It showed 2 figures, one tall with long hair, one small, standing in front of what appeared to be a building with a sign. The diner, Emily realized. Above them, Mikey had drawn a sun with an exaggerated smile and the words, "Thank you, Emily," in careful, precise handwriting. "This is beautiful, Mikey," Emily said, her throat tight with emotion. "Can I keep it?" He nodded enthusiastically. "I like drawing. My tutor says I'm good at it." "Your tutor?" Emily filed away this detail. Private tutors suggested wealth, privilege, more pieces of the puzzle she was trying to solve. "I don't go to regular school," Mikey explained, settling onto the small couch. "Mr. Peterson comes to the house to teach me. Math, history, science, all of it. Do you like that? Learning at home?" Mikey shrugged, a gesture that seemed too world-weary for a child. "It's okay, I don't have to deal with other kids, but..." He paused. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to go to a real school, to have friends." Emily sat beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You don't have friends? There are some kids at my father's, at the places he goes sometimes, but they're not really friends. They're just kids whose parents know my dad." Mikey picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. "It's not the same." Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Janet. "Hope you're feeling better. We're short-staffed today if you can make it in." Emily stared at the message, her stomach knotting with anxiety. She'd called in sick, something she never did, and now Janet needed her. But how could she go to work with Mikey here? She couldn't leave him alone, and she certainly couldn't take him to the diner where everyone would see him, ask questions. "I need to make a phone call," Emily told Mikey. "Stay here, okay? Don't answer the door for anyone." She stepped into the bathroom, the only space that offered any privacy, and called her friend Rebecca, one of the few people in Millbrook she truly trusted. Everything okay?" Rebecca's voice was thick with sleep. "I need a huge favor and I can't explain why right now. Can you trust me?" There was a pause. Rebecca had been Emily's best friend since high school, had held her hand through her mother's illness, had helped her move into this tiny apartment. If anyone would help without demanding explanations, it was Rebecca. "What do you need? Can you cover for me? Tell Janet I'm really sick, that you talked to me and I sound terrible. Buy me one more day? Emily, what's going on? I promise I'll explain everything soon. But right now, I just need time to figure something out. Please, Becca." "Okay," Rebecca said slowly. "Okay, I'll cover for you. But you owe me the full story." "I know. Thank you. I love you." Emily ended the call and leaned against the bathroom sink, studying her reflection in the spotted mirror. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair a mess. What was she doing? Harboring a runaway child, lying to her boss, hiding secrets she didn't fully understand. But when she returned to the main room and saw Mikey sitting on her couch, small and vulnerable and trusting her completely, she knew she couldn't have made any other choice. 8:15 a.m. The Romano organization, Mobile Command. Marco Castellano sat in the back of a surveillance van parked 3 blocks from Rosie's diner, surrounded by monitors, computers, and communications equipment. 2 of his best technical people worked the systems, pulling up security camera feeds, running facial recognition software, coordinating with the teams on the ground. "We've confirmed the boy was at the diner yesterday morning," Marco said into his phone, updating Vincenzo. "Multiple witnesses saw a waitress, Emily Carter, 24, been working there 3 years, acting unusual. protective of the storage room, left work early. She called in sick today for the first time in over 2 years. Where does she live? Vincenzo's voice was tightly controlled, the voice of a man barely containing his fear and frustration. Apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. We've had eyes on it since last night. No movement yet. Curtains drawn. I want to go in. Vin, we need to be smart about this. If your son is in there, we don't want to spook him into running again. And if this woman helped him, she might be the key to getting him to come home willingly. There was silence on the line. Then, what do you suggest? Let me make contact first. Professional, non-threatening. Feel out the situation. If Michael's there, if he's safe, we approach this delicately. And if he's not there, if something's happened to him? Marco heard the edge in Vincenzo's voice, the barely controlled fear that could quickly turn into something more dangerous. Then we adjust our approach. But let's not assume the worst. Every indication is that this woman helped him out of kindness, not malice. Find him, Marco. Whatever it takes. 9:30 a.m., Emily's apartment. Emily had made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, and watched Mikey eat with an appetite that suggested he was finally beginning to feel safe. They'd talked about small things, his favorite books, the movies he liked, the subjects he found interesting. Mikey was articulate and bright, with a curiosity about the world that his isolated upbringing hadn't managed to suppress. Emily, Mikey said, pushing his empty plate away. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Emily considered the question carefully. When I was your age, my mom got really sick. We didn't have much money, and things were scary. But people in this town helped us, brought us meals, helped with bills, just showed up. They taught me that sometimes helping someone isn't about what you get back. It's just about doing what's right. Not everyone thinks that way, Mikey said quietly. No, they don't, but enough people do. Enough people are good. Mikey looked at her with those dark, too wise eyes. My father, he's not a bad person. He just lives in a different world. A world where trust is dangerous, where kindness can be a weakness. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Mikey, what does your father do? Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She put a finger to her lips, signaling Mikey to be quiet, then moved silently to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, mid-40s, well-dressed in a dark suit, with the kind of bearing that suggested authority and danger in equal measure. He looked directly at the peephole as if he knew she was looking. Miss Carter, he called through the door, his voice calm and professional. My name is Marco Castellano. I need to speak with you about a boy you may have helped yesterday. I'm not law enforcement and I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk. Emily's mind raced. She could pretend she wasn't home, but the curtains were drawn and her car was parked outside. He'd know she was here. She could refuse to open the door, but how long would that work? She could. Emily, Mikey whispered behind her. That's Marco. He works for my father. The resignation in Mikey's voice told Emily everything. They'd been found. Whatever breathing room she'd tried to create, whatever time she'd hoped to buy, it was over. Miss Carter, Marco called again. I know Michael is in there. I know you've been taking care of him. I'm grateful for that. But his father is very worried and we need to resolve this situation. Please just talk to me. Emily looked at Mikey, who'd gone pale but calm, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. What do you want to do? Emily asked him softly. He won't hurt you, Mikey said. He's actually okay. Better than most of them. The fact that an 8-year-old had to make distinctions between which of his father's people were okay and which weren't broke Emily's heart all over again. She took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. Through the 6-inch gap, she could see Marco more clearly. Sharp features, intelligent eyes, and an expression that managed to be both threatening and reassuring. I'm Emily Carter, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And yes, there's a boy here. He was hungry and scared, and I helped him. That's all. I understand that, Miss Carter. And as I said, I'm grateful. But Michael's father needs to see him, needs to know he's safe. I'm asking you to let me in so we can talk about this like reasonable people. And if I don't? Marco's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then we'll have a more complicated situation. I have people positioned around this building. Michael's not leaving without us one way or another, but I'd prefer we handle this civilly. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. Emily understood the subtext. She could cooperate willingly or things would become difficult. She looked back at Mikey, who nodded slightly. Emily unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. 10:00 a.m., inside Emily's apartment. Marco stepped into the small apartment, his trained eyes taking in everything in seconds. The modest furnishings, the cramped space, the clear evidence of financial struggle. This wasn't someone with resources or connections. This was a young woman barely making ends meet who'd helped a child out of simple human decency. His gaze landed on Michael Jr., who stood by the couch, shoulders back, chin up, trying to look brave despite his fear. "Hello, Michael," Marco said gently. "Your father's been very worried about you. I'm sure he's been busy looking for me between meetings," Michael said, and the bitterness in his young voice was striking. Marco winced internally. He'd watched this boy grow up, had seen the distance between father and son widen over the years. "He's done nothing but look for you since you left." Everything else stopped. Michael looked surprised by this, as if he couldn't imagine his father dropping everything for him. Marco turned to Emily. "May I sit?" Emily gestured to the small couch and Marco sat, deliberately making himself less imposing. Emily remained standing, positioning herself slightly between Marco and Mikey, protective even now. "Tell me what happened," Marco said. From the beginning, Emily recounted the story, finding Mikey behind the diner, feeding him, bringing him here. As she spoke, Marco listened carefully, not just to her words but to her tone, her body language. She was nervous but honest, protective of Michael but not trying to hide anything. This was someone who genuinely cared about the boy's welfare. "Why didn't you call the authorities?" Marco asked. "Because he was terrified," Emily said simply. "He begged me not to, and I wanted to understand the situation before I made it worse." "You have good instincts," Marco said. Calling the police would have complicated things significantly. He didn't elaborate on why, but the implication hung in the air. "Mr. Castellano," Emily said carefully. "Mikey mentioned guards, walls, tutors at home. He said his life isn't normal. What exactly is he going back to?" It was a fair question, and Marco respected her for asking it. Michael comes from a complicated family. His father is a businessman with interests that require security measures. It's not an ideal childhood, but it's necessary for his safety. Safe from what? Marco met her eyes. From people who might want to use a child to gain leverage over his father. From a world that can be dangerous when you have what the Romano family has. Emily absorbed this information, pieces clicking together. The Romano family. I've heard that name before. In the news, maybe. Possibly, Marco said neutrally. Vincenzo Romano is a prominent businessman in Pittsburgh. Emily wasn't naive. The way Marco spoke, the security measures, the reason Mikey had run away, it all pointed to something beyond legitimate business. But she also understood that some things were better left unspoken. "Is Mikey's father a good man?" Emily asked quietly. Marco considered the question. "He's a man who loves his son very much but has made mistakes in how he's shown that love. He's built an empire to provide security and opportunity, but in doing so, he's created a cage. He knows this now. Finding Michael missing, it's changed him." Mikey spoke up from behind Emily. "Is Papa angry?" "He's worried," Marco said honestly, "and probably a little angry at himself, not at you. He wants to see you, Michael. He wants to bring you home." "And then what?" Mikey's voice was small. "Everything goes back to how it was." Marco leaned forward, his expression sincere. "I can't promise everything will change overnight, but I can promise that your father heard you. Running away, it got his attention in a way nothing else could have. He knows something needs to be different." Emily felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She couldn't keep Mikey here indefinitely. She knew that. Eventually, his father would find them, and the longer she delayed, the worse her situation might become. But she also couldn't send this child back to a life that had made him so desperate he'd run away. "Can I talk to Mikey alone for a minute?" Emily asked. Marco nodded and stood stepping toward the door. "I'll be right outside, take your time." When he'd left, Emily knelt down so she was eye level with Mikey. "What do you want to do? This is your choice." "Is it though?" Mikey said sadly. "I'm 8 years old. I don't really have choices. You have this one. If you want to stay longer, if you need more time, I'll find a way to make that happen." Mikey looked at her with such gratitude, it nearly broke her heart. "You'd really do that? Even though it might get you in trouble?" "I would, but Mikey, I think maybe your dad needs to hear from you how you feel. Maybe he can't change everything, but maybe he can change some things, and you won't know unless you give him the chance." Mikey was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he said, "Will you come with me? When I see my father? I'm scared to face him alone. If they'll let me, yes. Absolutely yes." Mikey nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll go back. But only if you're there too." Emily hugged him. This brave, lonely little boy who'd stumbled into her life and changed it forever. Then she stood and opened the door. Marco was waiting, phone in hand. "We've reached a decision?" he asked. "Mikey will go with you," Emily said. "But I'm coming too. He wants me there when he sees his father." Marco's eyebrows rose slightly. "Miss Carter, I don't think you understand what you're asking. This is a private family matter." "I understand perfectly," Emily interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "But Mikey asked me to come, and I'm not sending him off with strangers alone, so either I come, or we wait here until someone explains to me exactly why I can't." A small smile played at the corner of Marco's mouth. This young woman had more courage than sense, but he admired her protective instinct. "I'll need to clear it with Vincenzo." He stepped into the hallway to make the call. Emily could hear his low voice but not the words. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. "Mr. Romano has agreed to meet with you both. But Miss Carter, I need to be clear about something. You're about to enter a world very different from the one you know. Once you do, certain things can't be unknown. Are you sure you want to do this?" Emily looked at Mikey, who was watching her with hope in his eyes, and made her decision. "I'm sure." 4:30 a.m. The drive. They traveled in a black SUV with tinted windows. Emily in the back seat with Mikey, Marco up front beside the driver. The vehicle was luxurious, all leather and technology, worth more than Emily had made in the past 3 years combined. As they left Millbrook behind, Emily watched her small town disappear in the side mirror and wondered if she'd ever see it the same way again. She'd crossed a threshold, stepped into something bigger and more dangerous than her quiet life had prepared her for. Mikey sat close to her, not quite touching but near enough that she could feel his nervous energy. Emily reached over and took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's going to be okay," she whispered. "Promise?" Mikey whispered back. Emily couldn't promise that. She had no idea what waited for them at the Romano estate, but she squeezed his hand again and hoped her presence alone might be enough to see him through whatever came next. Through the window, she watched Pennsylvania countryside roll past, autumn colors brilliant against a perfect blue sky. It was a beautiful day, the kind that usually made her grateful to be alive. Today, it just made her aware of how fragile her peace had always been, how quickly everything could change. Marco's phone rang. He answered quietly, listened, then glanced back at Emily with an expression she couldn't read. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Mr. Romano is waiting." Emily's heart rate increased. In 20 minutes, she'd come face to face with Vincenzo Romano, a man whose name carried weight and danger, whose son had been so desperate to escape his world that he'd risked everything for a taste of freedom. In 20 minutes, her simple act of kindness behind a diner would lead to consequences she couldn't yet imagine. Beside her, Mikey gripped her hand tighter, and Emily realized with a sudden clarity, whatever happened next, whatever price she might pay for helping this child, she'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Some things were worth the risk. Some moments of humanity mattered more than safety. Emily Carter was about to discover just how high the price of kindness could be. 11:50 a.m. Approaching the Romano estate, the SUV turned off the main road onto a private drive lined with ancient oak trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead that filtered the autumn sunlight into golden patterns. Emily's breath caught as the estate came into view, a sprawling mansion of cream-colored stone that looked like it had been transplanted directly from the Italian countryside. Manicured gardens stretched in every direction, fountains sparkled in the distance, and the sheer scale of wealth on display made her small-town life feel impossibly distant. "Wow," Mikey whispered, and Emily realized this was the first time he'd seen his home from this perspective, as an outsider might see it with fresh eyes unclouded by familiarity. The iron gates opened automatically as they approached, and Emily noticed the security cameras, the subtle but unmistakable presence of guards positioned at strategic points. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress disguised as paradise. Marco glanced back at them. Mr. Romano was in his study. "Michael, your father is very eager to see you." Mikey's hand tightened in Emily's grip. "Is he angry?" "He's relieved," Marco said carefully. "Everything else, you'll work through together." The SUV pulled up to the main entrance, where wide stone steps led to massive wooden doors. A woman in her 60s stood waiting. gray hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a simple black dress and an expression of profound relief. "Maria," Mikey said softly. The moment the vehicle stopped, Maria rushed down the steps. Marco opened the door and Mikey practically fell into her arms. The woman held him tightly, speaking in rapid Italian, her voice breaking with emotion. Emily didn't need to understand the words to recognize the love there. This woman had clearly helped raise Mikey, had been terrified for him, was grateful beyond measure to have him back. Emily stepped out of the SUV, feeling acutely out of place in her simple jeans and work shirt, surrounded by luxury she could barely comprehend. Maria looked up from Mikey and met Emily's eyes, and something passed between them, one caretaker to another, recognition of shared concern for this child. "You must be Emily," Maria said in accented English. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping him safe." "I did what anyone would do," Emily said quietly. "No," Maria said firmly. "Most people would not. You risked much for a stranger's child. This is no small thing." Marco gestured toward the entrance. "We should go inside. Mr. Romano is waiting, and we shouldn't delay this any longer." 1 p.m., inside the Romano estate. The interior of the mansion matched the exterior's grandeur, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that Emily suspected might be original pieces by masters whose names she'd recognize. Their footsteps echoed as they walked through halls that seemed designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the power and wealth concentrated here. Mikey walked beside Emily now, Maria on his other side. Marco led them through the house to a set of dark wooden doors. He knocked twice, then opened them without waiting for a response. "Mr. Romano." "They're here." The study was a room of dark wood and leather, bookshelves lining the walls, a massive desk dominating the space. Behind that desk stood Vincenzo Romano. Emily's first impression was of controlled intensity. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that emphasized rather than softened his commanding presence. Dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples. His face was handsome in a sharp, angular way, but it was his eyes that captured Emily's attention. Dark, intelligent, and at this moment filled with such raw emotion that it was almost painful to witness. Those eyes found his son, and everything else in the room seemed to disappear. "Michael," Vincenzo said, his voice rough. For a long moment, father and son just stared at each other across the study. Then Mikey let go of Emily's hand and walked slowly toward his father, each step tentative as if crossing a great distance. Vincenzo came around the desk and dropped to one knee, bringing himself to his son's level. Emily saw his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to cup Mikey's face, as if confirming the boy was real, was truly here, was safe. "I'm sorry, Papa," Mikey whispered, and then he was crying, and Vincenzo pulled him into an embrace that looked like it might break them both. Emily felt tears sting her own eyes. Whatever else Vincenzo Romano might be, whatever shadows existed in his world, the love for his son was absolutely genuine. She watched this powerful man hold his child and understood that fear and relief in equal measure, the terror of almost losing what mattered most, the overwhelming gratitude of a second chance. Maria touched Emily's arm gently, guiding her toward a chair against the wall. "Give them a moment," she whispered. Emily sat, feeling like an intruder on this private reunion. Marco stood by the door, his expression carefully neutral, but Emily saw the slight relaxation in his shoulders, relief that this moment had come without complications. Vincenzo spoke to his son in Italian, his voice low and intense. Mikey responded in the same language, and though Emily couldn't understand the words, she could hear the emotion, explanation, apology, reconciliation. This conversation had been years in the making, and it was happening now because a lonely child had gotten desperate enough to run. Finally, Vincenzo pulled back and wiped tears from his son's face. "In English now," he said gently. "We have a guest who deserves to be part of this conversation." He stood keeping one hand on Mikey's shoulder and turned his full attention to Emily for the first time. The intensity of his gaze was almost physical. Emily felt exposed, evaluated, measured in an instant by eyes that had clearly learned to assess people quickly and accurately. She forced herself to meet that gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear racing through her veins. "Miss Carter," Vincenzo said, moving closer, "I owe you a debt I can never adequately repay. You protected my son when he was vulnerable. You showed him kindness when he needed it most. Thank you." The words were sincere, but Emily heard the question beneath them. "Who are you and why did you do this?" I'm just a waitress from Millbrook, Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. And I helped him because he was a scared, hungry child. I didn't need to know anything else. But now you know more, Vincenzo said quietly. You know who we are, where we live. You've seen things that most people outside this world never see. It wasn't quite a threat, but Emily understood the weight of what he was saying. She'd crossed into territory that came with obligations, with risks she hadn't fully considered. Mr. Romano, Emily said carefully, I don't want anything from you. I don't want money or favors or anything else. I just wanted to make sure Mikey was okay, that's all. That's all, Vincenzo repeated, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. You understand that most people in your position would see an opportunity here? A chance for financial gain or leverage? I'm not most people, Emily said, echoing what she'd told Mikey yesterday. And your son isn't an opportunity. He's a child who deserved help. Mikey had been watching this exchange carefully. Now he spoke up. Papa, Emily is good. She took care of me. She made me feel safe. She gave me her own bed and slept on the couch. She didn't have to do any of that. Vincenzo looked down at his son, then back at Emily, and she saw him processing this information, adjusting his understanding of her motivations. In his world, people always wanted something. The concept of help without expectation seemed foreign to him. Why did you call in sick to work today? Marco asked from his position by the door. Why hide Michael instead of contacting authorities? Emily turned to face him. Because he was terrified. Because calling the police felt like a betrayal of his trust. I was going to figure out the right way to help him, the way that wouldn't make things worse for him, even though hiding him was risky for you, Vincenzo observed. Yes. Why would you take that risk? Emily met his eyes steadily. Because some things matter more than safety. Because when a child needs help, you help them. That's not complicated, Mr. Romano. That's just being human. The room fell silent. Maria had tears in her eyes. Marco looked thoughtful, and Vincenzo Romano stared at Emily Carter as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, a creature from a different world operating by rules that didn't exist in his experience. 12:30 p.m. Difficult questions. Vincenzo moved to the leather couch near the fireplace and gestured for Emily and Mikey to sit. Maria brought in a tray of coffee and tea, placing it on the table before quietly withdrawing. Marco remained by the door, present but unobtrusive. Michael, Vincenzo said, his voice gentle but firm, I need you to tell me why you ran away. The truth, no matter how difficult. Mikey glanced at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a breath, he began, I was lonely, Papa. I know you're busy, I know your work is important, but I'm alone all the time. Maria is kind, but she's not family. Mr. Peterson is my tutor, not my friend. Antonio is my guard, not someone I can talk to. And you? His voice cracked. You're never there. You have meetings and phone calls and business trips, and I wanted to feel normal, just for a little while. Each word seemed to land like a physical blow. Vincenzo's expression remained controlled, but Emily saw the pain there, the guilt, the recognition of truths he'd been avoiding. I thought I was protecting you, Vincenzo said quietly. The walls, the security, the controlled environment, it was all to keep you safe from a world that can be dangerous. But it's not living, Mikey said. It's just existing in a cage, even if it's a nice cage. You're right. The admission seemed to cost Vincenzo something. You're absolutely right, and I've been wrong. I've been so focused on keeping you safe that I forgot you also need to be happy. I don't need much, Mikey said quickly. I don't need a different house or different things. I just need you, Papa. I need you to be there, to talk to me, to know what I'm thinking about and dreaming about. I need a father, not just a provider. Vincenzo reached out and pulled his son close again. You have one. I promise you have one. I've been absent, but I'm here now and things are going to change. Emily watched this exchange, her heart aching for both of them. She thought of her own childhood before her mother got sick. Simple but filled with presence, with connection, with love that showed up in daily small moments rather than grand gestures or material things. All the wealth in this mansion couldn't replace what Mikey actually needed. Vincenzo turned his attention back to Emily. You gave him something in one day that I failed to give him in months. You made him feel seen, valued, safe. How did you know what he needed? I listened to him, Emily said simply. I asked him questions and actually heard his answers. I treated him like a person, not a problem to be managed or a possession to be protected. The criticism was implicit but clear, and Emily half expected anger. Instead, Vincenzo nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. In my world, he said carefully, trust is a liability. Openness is weakness. I've spent 20 years building walls. Around my business, around my home, around myself. Those walls kept dangers out, but they also kept connection out. I taught my son to be isolated without meaning to. It's not too late to change that, Emily said. He's 8 years old, he still wants his father's attention. In a few years, if things don't change, he might stop wanting it. This is your chance. You speak very directly for someone in an unfamiliar situation, Marco observed from the door. Emily turned to him. What's the point of anything else? Mr. Romano asked me a question and I answered honestly. If he wanted platitudes, he wouldn't have brought me here. A small smile played at Vincenzo's lips, the first hint of lightness in his expression since they'd arrived. You're right. I appreciate honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. He paused. Tell me about yourself, Emily Carter. Who are you? Beyond a waitress who showed extraordinary kindness to a stranger's child. Emily felt uncomfortable under this scrutiny but forced herself to answer. I grew up in Millbrook. My mom raised me alone. My father left when I was young. She worked 3 jobs to support us, taught me about helping people, about community. She got sick when I was 20, and we spent the next year fighting an illness we couldn't afford to fight. She died 3 years ago, leaving me with medical debt and an understanding that life is fragile and precious. I'm sorry, Vincenzo said, and the sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. Losing a parent is, he glanced at his son, it changes everything. It does, Emily agreed. It taught me what matters and what doesn't. Money matters when you don't have enough to survive, but beyond that, connection matters. Love matters. Being present for the people who need you matters. That's what my mom gave me, even when she had nothing else to give. 1:15 p.m. Complications. They talked for over an hour, Vincenzo asking questions about Mikey's time away, Emily filling in details, Mikey himself becoming more animated as he felt truly heard perhaps for the first time. Plans were discussed. Vincenzo would clear his schedule more, would prioritize time with his son, would find ways to give Mikey more normal experiences while still maintaining necessary security. It was Marco who finally interrupted with a concern Emily had been dreading. Vin, we need to discuss the practical implications of this situation. Miss Carter has been inside the estate. She knows about the family, the security measures. People in Millbrook saw her leave with Michael. There will be questions. Vincenzo's expression hardened slightly, the businessman returning to override the vulnerable father. What are you suggesting? We need to ensure Miss Carter's discretion, and we need to manage the narrative in her town. Emily's stomach tightened. What does that mean exactly? Marco looked at her directly. It means that what you've seen here, what you know about the Romano family, needs to stay confidential. And it means we need a story for Millbrook that explains your absence and Michael's presence without raising uncomfortable questions. You want me to lie, Emily said flatly. I want you to be careful, Marco corrected, for your own safety as much as ours. The Romano name attracts attention, not all of it friendly. If word spreads that you have a connection to this family, it could make you a target for people who would use that connection for their own purposes. He's right, Vincenzo said, and Emily heard the weight in his voice. This is the price of crossing into our world, Emily. It comes with complications and risks you didn't ask for, but now have to manage. So what are you asking me to do? Go home, Vincenzo said. Resume your life. Tell people that you helped a lost child find his family, and that's the end of the story. Don't mention my name, this address, any details that could identify us, and... He paused. Accept my protection. I don't need protection. You do now, Vincenzo said firmly. Whether you realize it or not, helping my son has put you on the radar of my world. Most of that world is safe, but not all of it. I won't leave you vulnerable because you showed kindness. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, but the serious expressions around the room told her this wasn't negotiable. She'd entered a world with different rules, and refusing to play by them wouldn't make her safer. It would just make her foolish. What kind of protection? Discreet, Marco assured her. You won't see them, won't notice them, but if anyone takes an unusual interest in you, we'll know. And if you ever need help, you'll have it immediately. This is insane, Emily said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was insane. 48 hours ago, her biggest worry had been paying her electric bill on time. Now she was sitting in a mansion discussing security details with people who clearly operated in shadows she'd never known existed. Mikey had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Papa, Emily didn't ask for any of this. She just helped me. It's not fair that she has to deal with complications because of me. Life isn't fair, son, Vincenzo said gently. It's a lesson I learned young, and one you're learning now. But we can try to make it right. We can try to ensure that Emily's kindness doesn't cost her more than she's already paid. He turned back to Emily. I'm offering you money, not as payment for what you did, but as compensation for the disruption to your life. Enough to pay off any debts, to give you options to make your life easier. I already said I don't want money, Emily protested. I know what you said, but I also know you work at a diner in a small town, that you're taking online courses because you can't afford to quit work and go to school full-time, that you have medical debt from your mother's illness. I'm not offering charity, Emily. I'm offering justice. You helped my son. Let me help you. Emily's pride warred with practicality. The medical debt had been crushing her for 3 years. The dream of going back to school had seemed impossible, but accepting money from Vincenzo Romano felt like accepting something more, an obligation, a connection, a doorway she could never close once she stepped through it. Think about it, Vincenzo said, reading her hesitation. You don't have to decide now, but the offer stands, whenever you're ready. 2:30 p.m. Goodbye. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that Emily's time at the estate was coming to an end. She'd done what she came to do, ensured Mikey's safe return, witnessed the reunion, confirmed that the boy would be okay. Now it was time to return to her own world, changed but still hers. Mikey walked with her to the entrance, his small hand in hers, one last time. Will I see you again? He asked, his voice small. Emily knelt down to his level. I don't know, sweetheart. Your life and mine are very different, but I'll never forget you, and I'll always wonder how you're doing. Can I write you letters? Emily glanced up at Vincenzo, who stood nearby with Marco. The question was really directed at him. Would he allow this connection to continue? Vincenzo met her eyes, and something passed between them. Mutual recognition of what Mikey needed, what was right despite complications. Yes, Vincenzo said. You can write letters. Maria will make sure they reach Emily. Mikey hugged her tightly. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being nice to me when you didn't have to be. You made it easy, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. You're a special kid, Mikey. Don't let anyone tell you different. She stood and Vincenzo approached. He extended his hand and Emily took it, surprised by the warmth of his grip. This isn't goodbye, Vincenzo said. You're part of our story now, Emily Carter. That comes with responsibilities, but it also comes with support. If you ever need anything at all, you call Marco directly. He handed her a card with a single phone number printed on it. Day or night, no matter what. I know you don't, Vincenzo interrupted gently, but that's the offer nonetheless. You saved what matters most to me. That's not a debt I'll ever consider paid. Emily pocketed the card, not knowing if she'd ever use it, but understanding the gesture for what it was. A lifeline, a connection, a promise. Marco drove her back to Millbrook himself, the journey passing in contemplative silence. Emily watched the landscape change from wealthy suburbs to rural countryside, to her familiar small town, each mile marking a return to the life she knew, but would never quite see the same way again. As they pulled up to her apartment, Marco turned to face her. For what it's worth, Miss Carter, what you did was remarkable. Not many people would have made the choices you made, and even fewer would have handled the situation with as much grace. Vincenzo is right. You're part of our story now. Try not to worry too much about what that means. That's easy for you to say, Emily replied. This is your normal. This is my insane. Marco smiled slightly. Give it time. Normal and insane are more fluid concepts than you might think. Emily climbed out of the SUV and watched it drive away, taking with it the last physical connection to the strange 48 hours she'd just lived through. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, let herself in, and stood in the middle of the familiar space that suddenly felt both exactly the same and completely different. On her small kitchen table, Mikey's drawing still lay where he'd left it. 2 figures in front of a diner, a smiling sun overhead. Thank you, Emily, written in careful letters. Emily picked it up, traced the lines with her finger, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Whatever came next, whatever price her kindness would ultimately cost, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd do it all again. Some moments of humanity were worth any consequence. Emily poured coffee for Mr. Hendricks with hands that had finally stopped shaking. 2 weeks had passed since that surreal day at the Romano estate. 2 weeks since she'd returned to Millbrook, carrying secrets that felt heavier than anything she'd ever known. The town had been buzzing with questions at first. Where had she gone? Who was that boy? What had happened? Emily had stuck to the story Marco had helped her craft. She'd found a lost child, helped reunite him with his family, and that was the end of it. Most people had accepted this explanation, though Janet still gave her curious looks sometimes. You seem different, Janet said now, refilling napkin dispensers beside her. Quieter, like you're thinking about things far away from here. Emily forced a smile. Just tired, you know how it is. But it wasn't tiredness, it was awareness. She noticed things now she'd never noticed before. The car that seemed to be parked on Main Street more often than coincidence would explain, always with someone sitting inside. The way certain customers at the diner paid more attention to her than their meals warranted. Vincenzo's promised protection, invisible but present. At night, alone in her apartment, she'd sometimes take out the card he'd given her, running her thumb over the embossed numbers. She'd received 2 letters from Mikey so far, delivered by mail with no return address. He wrote about his father spending more time with him, about actually having conversations at dinner, about feeling less alone. The letters made her smile and ache simultaneously, glad that something good had come from all this. Uncertain what her role in their story was meant to be going forward, the man walked into Rosie's diner on a Tuesday afternoon, during the quiet lull between lunch and dinner. Emily noticed him immediately. Expensive suit, too polished for Millbrook, eyes that assessed the room with professional calculation. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and when Emily brought it, he smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Emily Carter. Her blood ran cold. Who's asking? Someone interested in your recent activities, helping lost children, making powerful friends. That's quite a story. Emily's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you know exactly who I'm talking about. And I think a conversation between us might be mutually beneficial. Emily set down the coffee pot carefully. I need to check on something in the kitchen. She walked away on shaking legs, pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed the number she'd memorized, but never called. Marco answered on the first ring. Miss Carter? There's someone here, Emily whispered. Asking questions about Mikey, about the family. He's not friendly. Stay calm, stay in public areas. I'm 15 minutes away. Emily returned to the counter to find the man still sitting there, still smiling that cold smile, but something in his expression had changed. He'd received a message on his phone, and whatever it said had altered his demeanor. I think we're done here, he said abruptly, standing and placing cash on the counter. Enjoy your coffee, Miss Carter. Stay safe. He left and Emily watched through the window as he got into a dark sedan and drove away. Within minutes, Marco's SUV pulled up outside. The reality sets in. Marco sat across from Emily in a booth, his expression serious. The man who approached you works for a group that's interested in the Romano family's activities. They were testing to see if you might be a source of information. But I don't know anything. You know enough. You've been inside the estate. You have a connection to Michael. In our world, that makes you potentially valuable or potentially vulnerable. Emily felt the walls closing in. This is what you meant about complications, isn't it? This is the price. Yes, Marco said honestly. But it's also why we're here. Why you're protected. This man won't approach you again, we've made that very clear. But Emily, you need to understand. Your life has changed. The question now is whether you accept that change or fight against it. Emily looked out the window at Millbrook's Main Street. The same view she'd seen thousands of times now filtered through new understanding. She'd helped a child, and in doing so, had stepped into a world where kindness came with consequences, where good intentions intersected with dangerous realities. That night she wrote a letter to Mikey, telling him she was okay, that he shouldn't worry. She didn't mention the man at the diner or the fear that had wrapped around her heart. Some burdens were hers to carry, but she also wrote something else. Your father was right. Helping you changed my life in ways I'm still understanding. But Mikey, I want you to know that I'd do it again. Every single time. Some things are worth the cost. 6 months later, an unexpected visit. The black SUV pulled up to Rosie's diner on a spring morning, and Emily's heart skipped when she saw who emerged. Vincenzo Romano, with Mikey beside him. Father and son walked into the diner together, and Emily saw immediately how much had changed. Vincenzo's hand rested on Mikey's shoulder with easy affection. The boy looked happier, lighter, more like a child should look. "Emily," Mikey ran to her, and she caught him in a hug. "What are you doing here?" "Papa brought me," Mikey said proudly. "We're on a road trip, just the two of us, and I asked if we could stop to see you." Vincenzo approached, and his slight smile was genuine. "My son wanted to show you that things are different now. Better. I thought he deserved that." Emily served them breakfast, pancakes for Mikey, coffee for Vincenzo, and listened as the boy chattered about school. He was attending now, with appropriate security, about friends he'd made, about weekend trips with his father. As they prepared to leave, Vincenzo handed Emily an envelope. "Don't argue," he said quietly. "Just accept it. Consider it an investment in someone who proved that goodness still exists in the world." After they'd driven away, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a check, enough to pay off all her debts, to finish school, to start over if she wanted to, and a note in Vincenzo's precise handwriting. "Thank you for teaching my son, and me, what really matters. VR." Emily stood in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, understanding finally the full weight of what had happened. She'd fed a hungry boy behind a diner, not knowing he was a Mafia boss's son. That simple act had cost her peace of mind, had complicated her life, had exposed her to dangers she'd never imagined. But it had also restored a father to his son, had proven that kindness mattered even in the darkest corners of the world, had shown her that humanity could bridge any divide. The price of kindness had been high. But looking at the check in her hands and remembering Mikey's smile, Emily knew with absolute certainty it had been worth every penny.